It came on a Tuesday, sandwiched between a grocery flyer and a notice from the water company. The envelope was heavy, creamy white, edged in gold filigree. I almost didn't open it. I thought it was a charity appeal or some kind of real estate ad, but when I slid my finger beneath the flap and pulled out the card, I saw their names printed in bold serif letters. Mr. and Mrs. Grant Holloway request the honor of your presence. For a second, I didn't even register what I was reading. I had to blink, reread. Then it hit me. My only son was getting married, and this was how I found out. No call, no visit, just this polished square of thick paper, as if I were a distant aunt or a work colleague, someone you include out of obligation, not affection. I stood in the kitchen with it in my hand, the edges pressed into my fingers, my eyes scanning it again and again like it might change. June 10th, Magnolia Ridge Country Club, black tie optional, reception to follow. I set it down beside a pile of utility bills and sat at the table staring at it while the fridge hummed steadily behind me. An hour later, I picked up the phone. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Mom," he said, distracted, like he was reading an email or chopping garlic or half watching a screen. Not rude, just somewhere else. I got the invitation, I said, trying to sound warm. Oh, good. A pause. No real excitement. Just confirmation. Charlotte handled most of that stuff. She seems very organized, I said, then tried to keep my voice light. I thought maybe I could help with something. Flowers, music, tasting the cake, I know these things can get overwhelming. A longer pause. Then it's really all taken care of. Charlotte's parents have a planner, and we're keeping things simple. I wasn't offering money, Grant. I just meant being part of it. A mother-son dance, maybe helping you pick the mom. His voice cut in softer, but firm. Let's not make it complicated. Just wear something nice, okay? Not too conservative. Her family's pretty traditional. I felt my hand tighten around the phone. I understand, I said. It's not a big deal, he added, almost apologetic. You'll have fun. Of course, I forced a small laugh. It's your day. I'm just happy to be invited. He didn't hear the crack in my voice. He was already saying goodbye. Charlotte was making dinner. He had to go. When the line went silent, I looked down at the invitation again. Black tie optional, it said. Optional. That word rang louder than the rest. I slid it back into the envelope and placed it gently in the drawer with the coupons I never used. Then I walked into the hallway, turned on the porch light, and stood for a while, letting the quiet settle. By morning, I had started setting aside bus fare and canceling my cable. If I couldn't be part of the plan, I would at least arrive looking like I belonged. The next morning, I pulled out a legal pad and started a list: bus fare, dress shoes, hair. I didn't know exactly how much it would all cost, but I knew I'd have to find it in places no one would notice but me. So I began cutting away at the edges of my life. I stopped buying coffee on the way to work, walked instead of riding the bus even when the sidewalks were caked in slush. I brought boiled eggs and apples from home while everyone else ordered lunch. I canceled my cable and let the apartment grow quiet. In the evenings, I read books from the library by lamplight and filled the space with things that didn't talk back. When my coworkers asked why I wasn't joining for happy hour or weekend brunch, I smiled and said I was saving for something special. No one asked what. Every 2 weeks, I tucked a few bills into an envelope marked June. By April, it felt heavier in my drawer. I never once told Grant what I was doing. He hadn't asked, and I didn't offer. I spent 4 Saturdays visiting department stores I usually passed without a glance, the kind where clerks follow you around or ignore you entirely. I tried on dresses that hung like paper or clung like desperation. Then I saw it deep emerald off the shoulder, simple but cut with intention. It didn't shimmer. It didn't beg. It stood on its own. I tried it on. It fit. The price tag made me wince, but I handed over my envelope and counted each bill myself. When the cashier folded it into the garment bag, she smiled and said, "You've got good taste." I nodded. I didn't say I hadn't bought anything this nice in over a decade. The The shoes came next silver with a low heel, just enough to feel elegant without asking too much of my knees. I found a clutch to match in the clearance bin, and then 2 weeks before the wedding, I booked a salon appointment. I hadn't done that since the year my husband died. The stylist brushed through my gray strands and asked what I wanted. Soft, I said. Nothing dramatic. Just me, but seen. She added curls and a few warm highlights. When she spun the chair around, I stared at the woman in the mirror. She looked rested, intentional. Not young, but no longer fading. At home, I slipped the dress from its hanger and laid it gently across the bed. I traced the stitching with my hand and imagined how it might catch the light when I walked. Not for Grant, not for Charlotte's family, for the woman who had waited too long to take up space. I hung it back up and zipped the garment bag. It was ready, and so was I. I had nothing more to offer them, but I would not arrive small. I would enter that room with the only thing I had left to protect the quiet, undeniable fact of my own presence. The Magnolia Ridge Country Club shimmered with that kind of wealth that doesn't speak, it glides. Polished floors, towering floral displays, a pianist in the corner, playing something meant to sound effortless. I stood in the entryway smoothing the fabric of my dress and catching my reflection in a pane of glass. I looked fine. I looked like I'd made an effort. I reminded myself I didn't come here to be noticed. I came not to disappear. A young woman with a clipboard glanced at my place card and guided me through the ballroom. "Table 9, just past the kitchen doors," she said, without looking up. I followed, heels clicking softly behind her, past rows of white-clothed tables filled with laughter and crystal glasses. Table 9 sat tucked in a corner near the swinging doors. The floral centerpiece was smaller than the others, and 3 of the chairs were still unoccupied. The people already seated offered polite nods, strangers in formal wear with the stiff smiles of those unsure where they belong. I took my seat and folded my napkin into my lap. From across the room, I spotted Grant. He stood tall in a tailored tuxedo, smiling as he shook hands and posed for photos. Charlotte was beside him, radiant in lace and diamonds. They looked like a photograph meant for other people's mantles. He didn't see me. Or if he did, he gave no sign. The servers began delivering the first course to the head table: glazed carrots, petite salads, crusty bread in silver baskets, plates swept through the room like clockwork. Table by table, everyone received theirs. Then came table 8. I sat up straighter. We were next. But nothing came. One server approached, eyes darting, whispering to another. He passed our table twice, then vanished into the kitchen. Others around me had already begun their meals. The elderly woman beside me was halfway through her roast chicken. A young man in a vest appeared at my shoulder, red-cheeked and flustered. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. There was a mix-up with your plate. It'll just be a few more minutes." I nodded. Of course. My voice didn't shake, but my stomach was starting to. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. The room swelled with music and silverware and laughter. My place setting remained empty. Finally, someone set a plate in front of me with an awkward apology and a quick retreat. The salmon was pale and dry. The asparagus limp. The potatoes looked as though they'd been scraped together from scraps. I picked up my fork out of reflex more than hunger, and then I heard Grant. He was leaning toward Charlotte just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "They finally brought my mom her food," he said, his tone light and amused. "She's used to eating what life leaves behind. She won't mind." Charlotte laughed. It was high and brittle. A few others joined in, out of habit maybe, out of instinct. My hand stilled. The fork didn't reach my mouth. Something inside me, something old and buried, broke not loudly. Not all at once, but with a precision that felt permanent. Margaret, a woman from the table, leaned toward me, her eyes wide. "Did he just say, 'I'm fine'?" I said, though the words tasted like ash. I set down my fork. The laughter had already moved on, but I had not. My son had given his best smile to a room of strangers, and saved the scraps for me. The ballroom dimmed as the music softened, and all attention turned to the glowing circle of light at the center of the dance floor. Grant and Charlotte stepped into it effortlessly, like they belonged there, like they had always belonged. They moved with practiced ease, swaying gently to some string arrangement of a love song I didn't recognize. I sat at the edge of it all, my hands folded neatly in my lap, watching from the corner as if through glass. The green dress felt tighter, now the air around me heavier. I let my face hold a faint smile, neutral, pleasant, invisible. The crowd clapped as their dance ended, and the DJ announced the parent dances. Charlotte's father rose first, offering his arm to his daughter. They twirled gracefully. People murmured sweet things. When the song faded, Charlotte stepped aside and her mother took Grant's hand. That was the moment I knew. There was no confusion, no delay. No one looked around for me. No one beckoned me forward. Grant held his mother-in-law with steady hands, and they danced like they'd rehearsed it. The applause was warm. The lights flickered gold across the crystal. I waited. For a look, a gesture, even a mistake, but none came. The song ended. The crowd returned to their seats. Other couples filled the floor. Friends, cousins, co-workers, people with places. I sat a while longer, then reached for my clutch, careful not to disturb the water glass still sweating beside my untouched plate. I stood slowly, nodding once to Margaret, who reached for my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. No one noticed me walking out. Not Grant. Not Charlotte. Not anyone who shared my last name. Outside, the air had cooled. A breeze lifted the edges of my hair, undoing the work of the stylist. I didn't mind. I made my way to the parking lot, slipped out of my shoes before starting the car, and drove the quiet 2 hours home without music. Back in my apartment, I hung the dress in the back of the closet, not hidden, just finished. I washed my face, undid the curls, folded my hands around a cup of tea, and sat at the table where the invitation had first arrived. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was just done waiting to be chosen. Done hoping to be remembered. And by morning I would know exactly what needed to happen next. The next morning I woke before the sun. The apartment was quiet, still wrapped in that soft, early silence that used to comfort me. But not today. Today it only confirmed what had already settled in my bones. I was alone in a way that wasn't temporary. I made coffee, not because I needed the caffeine, but because my hands needed something to do. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't check my phone. I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began to type. Subject regarding the wedding time, sent 6:42 a.m. Grant. I'm writing this while everything from yesterday is still fresh, though I suspect what I remember won't match the version you'll choose to keep. You didn't look for me once. Not when I arrived. Not during dinner. Not during the dancing. You said she's used to eating what life leaves behind. And the worst part is you were right. I have been. I've eaten the leftovers of your time, your attention, your respect for years. I taught you without meaning to that you could give me whatever remained, and I'd still be grateful. I taught you that silence was love, that absence was acceptable, and that presence, when offered, was enough. That ends today. Effective immediately, I've stopped the monthly deposits. The $600 you believed came from a modest trust fund. There is no trust fund. That was me. Working Saturdays, cutting corners, skipping what I needed so you didn't have to. I wanted you to believe you had something secure, but it wasn't secure. It was just me propping you up because I didn't know how to stop. The credit card in your name will be canceled by noon. The balance is cleared. It will not be reopened. The house, the one you assumed would eventually be yours, is going on the market this week. It's worth a fair amount. More than either of us probably expected. I'll be using the proceeds to rest, to move, to figure out who I am, outside of being your mother. You once asked why I never remarried. The truth is, I was too busy raising someone who thought I'd always be there, who treated me like furniture, who invited me to witness his life but never to stand inside it. This isn't revenge. This is a release. You are still my son. But I will no longer be your safety net, your silent donor, or the woman who sits politely while you perform your love for others. I'm not angry. I'm awake. You may not understand now. That's fine. I didn't write this to change your mind. I wrote it to finally hear my own. Mom, I read it 3 times, checked it for typos, then hit send. There was no dramatic punctuation, no emotional flair, just a plain subject line and a truth I'd delayed too long. By mid-morning, I called the credit card company, closed the account. By noon, I emailed a real estate agent. She called me within the hour. We set a listing date for the following week. I opened a new notebook and wrote one word at the top, Savannah. I didn't know why that city came to mind, only that it did. And it felt like somewhere I might learn to breathe again. That evening, I made a simple dinner and ate every bite. Not in celebration, just in clarity. And by the time the sun went down, I no longer felt like someone waiting to be asked for anything. By the end of that same day, Grant replied, "Subject, are you serious? Mom, what is this? Are you okay?" That email was a lot. It was a joke. Everyone was laughing. Not just at you. You're being way too sensitive. Selling the house. That's insane. That's my inheritance you're talking about. Let's be adults and talk this through. I'll come over Sunday. We'll figure it out. Grant, I didn't respond. By Friday, he was calling nonstop, 6 missed calls in a day, followed by another email, shorter this time and more pointed. Subject, stop ignoring me. I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk before you do something stupid. I spoke to someone, a lawyer friend. You can't just erase me from everything. Call me back. Now. I read it twice, then forwarded it to the realtor with a simple line, "Please expedite the listing process." She responded in minutes. By Tuesday morning, the house was on the market. By Thursday, we had 3 offers. I took the highest $315,000 cash with a 30-day close. I called the utility companies, forwarded my mail, packed my things in silence. I didn't announce anything to neighbors. I didn't post a goodbye. I donated most of what I owned and folded the rest into boxes, marked simply with numbers. I changed my phone number the week after the sale was finalized. It was the last string that connected me to his assumptions. The silence that followed was heavier than I expected, but it was clean. No notifications, no panic texts, just the hum of the fridge and the scratching of pen against paper as I planned what came next. Savannah wasn't a grand dream. It was a whisper that had lingered after I wrote it in the notebook. I found a furnished 1-bedroom apartment 4 blocks from the river, signed a 6-month lease, put down a deposit without asking anyone's opinion. On the day I left Indiana, I stood in the center of the now empty house for one long moment. I pressed my hand against the wall by the kitchen, where Grant once drew a rocket ship in crayon when he was 4. I'd painted over it, but I could still see the outline when the light hit just right. I didn't cry. I locked the door and left the key under the mat, just as the new owners had asked. The drive south took 2 days. I took the slower route, stopped when I wanted to sleep in a roadside inn that smelled like lemons and rain. I arrived in Savannah on a Monday afternoon, the sky overcast, but kind. The woman who unloaded her car into that small apartment was no longer interested in being gracious. She was interested in being whole. Savannah moved at a different pace. The streets breathed slower, the mornings stretched longer, and no one asked too many questions. I found a part-time job at a bookstore tucked between a bakery and a second-hand dress shop. The owner, a woman named Rita, hired me after a 10-minute conversation. "You know how to be still," she said. "We need that in a place like this." My days were filled with the smell of old paper and soft jazz. I stacked shelves, recommended quiet novels to strangers, and learned how to make chamomile tea the right way. I walked home most evenings past the iron fences and hanging moss past front porches with rocking chairs that creaked just loud enough to feel human. I made simple meals, learned how to cook for one without apology, read before bed, slept without tension. The quiet no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space. 3 months passed before he found me. He showed up just after closing, standing outside the shop with a look I almost didn't recognize. His eyes were darker, his frame smaller. His hands shook when he said my name. "Please," he said, "can we fix this?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. "I already did," I said. We stood there for a moment, strangers now. He opened his mouth to speak again, but I turned the key in the lock behind me and stepped away from the door. "I get off work at 6, I told him. "There's a cafe next door. They close at 7. If you have something to say, you have 1 hour." That evening, I sat across from my son as the streetlights came on, and I listened to a man who finally understood what it felt like to be left. I bought clay pots from a vendor at the Saturday market and planted thyme basil and a little rosemary on the windowsill. They took to the sunlight quickly, as if they'd been waiting for someone to care for them. I didn't name them. I just watered them each morning and let them grow. The emerald dress went into a box labeled "Keep," not because I planned to wear it again, but because it reminded me of the woman who chose herself that day. Some things deserve to be folded, not discarded. I booked a train ticket to Oregon for the fall. No plans, just windows and movement and space to think. I'd never traveled alone before. It didn't scare me. Grant hadn't called again, not since the cafe. I didn't block his number, but I didn't check for messages either. The waiting had left me, and I wasn't inviting it back. I'd started hosting poetry nights at the bookstore, nothing fancy, just mismatched chairs and soft lighting. Last week I read something of my own. It felt like sitting down at a table no one could take from me, and for the first time in my life I was no longer hungry for a seat. I had built my own.